My name is Linda. I'm 32 years old, and for my entire life, I've been the responsible one, the designated adult in a family of golden children. Last Christmas, that was all supposed to change. I was walking into my parents' house with two pieces of life-changing news: a huge promotion and an engagement ring from the man I love. This was it. This was the moment I'd finally get the validation I'd been working for since I was 15, flipping burgers to buy my own damn car. But instead, after a dinner of endless praise from my brother and sister, my mother looked at me, her eyes cold, and said, "You're the most useless child we have." Useless. The word just hung there, sucking all the air out of the room. I felt completely and utterly broken. But what my mother didn't know was that I had receipts. While my family saw me as the reliable, unremarkable background character in their own epic sagas, I was quietly building an entirely different life in a world they couldn't even be bothered to understand. My mother dismissed my career in marketing as playing with pretty pictures, a cute little hobby. She had absolutely no idea. She didn't know that I wasn't just playing with pictures. I was commanding armies. The campaigns I ran weren't just about slogans. They were about strategy, data analytics, and psychological warfare fought on a digital battlefield. I was managing multi-million-dollar budgets for clients whose names are household words. The pressure was immense. The competition, brutal. It was a world where results were the only thing that mattered, and if you didn't deliver, you were out. There were no excuses, no safety nets, no one to bail you out if you screwed up. It was the exact opposite of the world my brother and sister lived in, and honestly, I thrived on it. At work, I wasn't just Linda. I was the person my boss, a tough-as-nails woman named Sarah, called her secret weapon. When a high-stakes account was on the brink of collapse, she didn't call the smooth-talking guy with the Ivy League degree. She called me. While my family was celebrating Kevin getting his name on a research paper someone else mostly wrote, I was in a boardroom in Chicago, single-handedly winning back a $3 million account with a presentation I'd built on 3 hours of sleep and pure adrenaline. The applause in that room, the look of respect from seasoned executives, that felt more real than any hollow praise I ever got at home. The promotion to senior marketing coordinator wasn't just a title change, it was a validation. It was proof that my hard work, my intelligence, my relentless drive, it all meant something to someone. It came with a team to lead and a significant salary increase, an increase that my family knew nothing about. I never told them. What was the point? Sharing my successes with them was like throwing a pebble into the Grand Canyon. It just disappeared without a sound. So, I kept it to myself. I worked insane hours. There were so many nights I'd see the sunrise from my office window, my eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets, fueled by nothing but cold coffee and the burning desire to prove something. To prove them all wrong? Maybe. Or maybe just to prove it to myself. I sacrificed weekends, missed out on concerts with friends, and postponed vacations. My personal life was a casualty of my ambition, a price I was willing to pay because my career was the one place where my value wasn't up for debate. It was measured in numbers, in growth, in profit. And all that sacrifice, it led to my real secret weapon, the one thing that gave me a power they could never comprehend. It wasn't just my career. It was the financial independence that came with it. They pictured me living paycheck to paycheck in what my mother called that tiny little apartment. The apartment was nice, by the way. Small, yes, but it was mine. A sanctuary they rarely visited. They thought my little marketing job barely covered the rent. The truth? The truth was sitting quietly in a high-yield savings account and a diversified investment portfolio that I managed myself. Every bonus, every commission check, a significant portion of every paycheck. It didn't go to designer clothes or fancy cars. It went into what I privately called my FU fund, a freedom and independence fund. It started as a safety net, a cushion in case I ever lost my job. But over the years, as my income grew, it became something more. It became a war chest. It was my escape hatch, my leverage, my proof that I didn't need them. I didn't need their approval, and more importantly, I sure as hell didn't need their money. This fund was the direct result of every holiday I worked, every late night I pushed through, every time I chose discipline over instant gratification. It was built on the foundation of being underestimated, and their ignorance of its existence, their condescending belief that I was just scraping by. That was my greatest advantage. They had no idea that the useless daughter, the one they never bothered to truly see, was quietly becoming the most financially secure person in the entire family. They were about to find out that my silence wasn't weakness. It was a strategy. And I was just waiting for the right moment to make my move. The weeks leading up to Christmas felt strange. There was a weird energy coming from my family, a kind of unsettling buzz I couldn't quite put my finger on. It started with my mother, Helen. She began calling me more often than usual, but the calls weren't her typical critiques or passive-aggressive comments. They were fishing expeditions. Her voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with a fake concern that immediately put my guard up. One afternoon, she called me at work. "Linda, honey," she began, "I was just thinking about you. With the holidays coming up, I know things can get expensive. Is your company giving out good bonuses this year?" It was such a blatant question about my finances, so out of character for someone who usually pretended my career didn't exist, that I was momentarily stunned. I gave her a vague, non-committal answer, something about the economy being tough, and quickly changed the subject. But the question just hung in the air, a big red flag waving in my mind. A few days later, my sister Karen sent me a text. It was a picture of a ridiculously expensive designer handbag. The text read, "OMG, isn't this to die for? You have such good taste. What do you think?" It was bizarre. Karen and I hadn't had a real conversation about fashion, or anything personal for that matter, in years. She had never once asked for my opinion on anything. It felt less like a question and more like a test. A test to see what I could afford, maybe? I didn't respond. A cold knot of anxiety started to form in my stomach. Something was off. I could feel it, like the drop in air pressure before a major storm. My family was circling, their behavior coordinated and unnatural. They were planning something, and I had a sinking feeling that I was at the center of it, but not in a good way. Christmas morning arrived, and the feeling of dread followed me to my parents' house. The house was decorated perfectly, the air filled with the scent of cinnamon and pine, a perfect Norman Rockwell painting of holiday cheer that felt like a complete lie. I walked in with my arms full of gifts, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. I had my two pieces of incredible news tucked away like precious jewels, and a foolish part of me still hoped, still prayed, that maybe this time would be different. Maybe my promotion and my engagement would finally be enough, enough to be seen, enough to be valued. The dinner was a masterclass in the family dynamics I knew so well. It was the Kevin and Karen show, starring my mother as the fawning announcer and my father as the silent, approving audience. We heard about Kevin's latest medical conference in Hawaii, which sounded more like a vacation my parents funded. We heard about Karen's brilliant legal maneuvering in a case that sounded suspiciously simple. I sat there, smiling and nodding, a ghost at my own family's feast. My turn never came. Every time I tried to steer the conversation to find an opening, my mother would deftly cut me off and pivot back to one of her golden children. Finally, during a lull, I decided to just go for it. I couldn't wait any longer. Actually, I said, my voice a little louder than intended, I have some exciting news to share. Every head turned towards me, and for a second, I had their full attention. I took a deep breath. I was recently promoted to Senior Marketing Coordinator, I announced, trying to keep my voice from shaking. My Aunt Susan smiled kindly and said congratulations, but my mother just sighed. That's nice, dear, she said dismissively. Now, Karen was telling us about the new partner at her firm. It was a slap in the face, but I wasn't done. I had my ace in the hole. And, I said, interrupting her, I have even bigger news. I reached into my purse, my fingers closing around the small velvet box. This was it. This was the one they couldn't dismiss. I opened it and placed it on the table, the diamond catching the light. David asked me to marry him, I said, my voice full of a joy that felt defiant. We're engaged. The reaction was not what I had dreamed of. There was a stunned silence. Then, a smattering of polite, forced congratulations. My father's smile looked genuine, but my mother's face, it was a mask of cold indifference. Then came the interrogation. What does he do again? My brother Kevin asked, as if he hadn't met David 3 times. A high school English teacher, I replied proudly. My mother let out another sigh, this one laced with pure disappointment. A teacher? She repeated, the word sounding like an insult. Well, I suppose that's stable. Stable, the word she used for things that were safe, boring, and utterly unimpressive. And that's when she delivered the final blow, the one that shattered every last illusion I had about my place in this family. She looked at me, her eyes completely devoid of warmth, and in front of everyone, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, she said it. Her voice was calm, conversational, which made the cruelty of the words cut even deeper. You know, Linda, she began, I have to be honest. I'm worried about David. I mean, what kind of man proposes to you? Let's be realistic here. You're 32. You work in a job that barely pays the bills. You live in that tiny apartment, and you've never really accomplished anything significant. She paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air before delivering the kill shot. You're the most useless child we have. Useless. It wasn't screamed. It was stated as a simple, undeniable fact. Like the sky is blue, or water is wet. My own mother, on Christmas Day, just seconds after I announced my engagement, had publicly declared me worthless. My brother and sister didn't flinch. They just stared down at their plates. My father looked down too, his silence a deafening roar of cowardice. In that moment, I realized the truth. The strange calls, the probing questions. It wasn't just random dysfunction. It was a conspiracy. They had been sizing me up, evaluating my life, and I had been judged and found wanting. This wasn't a spontaneous insult, it was a verdict. A verdict delivered by a unified front, designed to put me back in my place at the precise moment I dared to feel proud of my life. And that was the moment I realized that after 32 years of trying, of sacrificing, of hoping, I was done. Absolutely and completely done. At this point, I don't even know what word to use for what they did. If you're feeling the same white-hot anger that I'm feeling right now, do me a favor. Comment with just one word that describes this family's actions. But instead of breaking me, that final, brutal act of betrayal forged something new inside me. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't hurt. It was a cold, hard resolve that felt like steel crystallizing in my veins. They thought they had delivered the final word. They had no idea I was about to start a whole new chapter. The moment my mother's final word, useless, landed, something inside me didn't just break. It vaporized. The part of me that had spent 32 years craving their approval, the part that cried after every dismissive comment, the part that kept trying, hoping, praying for a crumb of validation. It was just gone. In its place was a profound and terrifying silence, a vacuum. I wasn't sad. I wasn't hurt. I was nothing. I looked around the table at the faces of my family. My mother, smug and self-satisfied. My father, staring at his plate, was the portrait of a man who chose comfort over courage every single time. My brother and sister, utterly indifferent, are already lost in their own worlds. And in that chilling silence, a single thought echoed with the clarity of a gunshot in a quiet cathedral. It's over. It wasn't a dramatic, emotional realization. It was a cold, hard fact, a mathematical certainty. They will never change. This will never stop. Not unless I stop it. The pain that had been a constant companion for my entire life suddenly transformed. It wasn't a weight anymore. It was fuel. A cold, clean-burning fuel that filled the void inside me with a singular, icy purpose. I was no longer a participant in their drama. I was about to become the director of a whole new show. I didn't storm out. I didn't raise my voice. The old Linda would have dissolved into tears, would have tried to defend herself, to explain, to plead her case. But Tinda was dead. The new Linda simply pushed her chair back from the table, the sound of the wood scraping against the floor abnormally loud in the tense silence. I folded my napkin and placed it on the table, a small, deliberate act of finality. I could feel their eyes on me, expecting the usual tears, the usual retreat. They didn't get it. They didn't see the shift that had occurred behind my eyes. I walked out of the dining room, down the familiar hallway, and out the front door into the cold Christmas night air without looking back. I didn't grab my coat. I didn't say goodbye. The cold was a welcome shock, snapping me into an even sharper state of focus. Sitting in my car, the engine off, the only sound was the frantic buzzing of my phone in my purse. Call after call. Text after text. I ignored them all. I didn't drive home right away. I just sat there in the quiet darkness of my childhood street, the festive lights of the neighbors' houses blurring into meaningless patterns. I wasn't processing grief. I was strategizing. My mind, which hours ago was filled with dreams of wedding plans and celebratory toasts, was now operating like the marketing professional I was. I was identifying a problem, analyzing the stakeholders, and formulating a multi-phase action plan. The objective was simple: total, unequivocal independence. The method? A quiet, decisive strike using the very weapon they never knew I possessed. When I finally got back to my apartment, my sanctuary, the first thing I did was pour myself a glass of whiskey. Neat. I took a sip, the burn grounding me in the present moment. Then I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. The buzzing of my phone was a constant, desperate background noise, a soundtrack to their impending panic. I put it on silent and placed it face down. Their time was over. My time had begun. My fingers flew across the keyboard with a precision born of years of professional practice. First, my banking apps. All of them. I went into the settings for the recurring monthly payment to my mother's account. The one labeled Mom Car Pimped. The payment for $1,500 had been automatically transferred on the 26th of every month for 24 straight months. With a single, satisfying click, I hit Cancel. A pop-up asked, "Are you sure you want to cancel this scheduled payment?" I clicked Confirm without a moment's hesitation. It felt like severing a rope that had been around my neck for years. Next, I opened a new folder on my desktop. I named it Project Liberation. Inside, I started creating subfolders. I spent the next 2 hours meticulously going through my bank statements, my Venmo history, and my credit card bills. I took screenshots of every single financial transaction I had ever made for my family. The $3,000 For Me Dad surgery, clearly labeled For Dad Med Bills. The $3,000 For Me Dad surgery, clearly labeled For Dad Med Bills. The $1,000 transfer to my sister with the memo bar exam fee, good luck. The $4,000 wire transfer to the student loan company to pull my brother out of default. Each screenshot was a piece of evidence, a receipt for my loyalty, a receipt for my silence. I organized them by person, by date, by amount. It was a cold, emotionless process. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was an auditor, compiling a report on a failed enterprise. The next call I made wasn't to my family. It was to a name I had stored in my phone for just such a contingency. A financial advisor? A sharp, no-nonsense woman I'd met through a work colleague. I left a calm, clear voicemail. "Hi, Angela, it's Linda. Hope you're having a good holiday. Something's come up, and I need to make some aggressive moves to firewall my assets immediately. Please call me first thing in the morning. It's time to go fully defensive." The term firewall my assets felt powerful. It was the language of business, of protection, of control. Then I opened a new document. The heading was simple: Conditions for future contact. Below it, I started typing. It wasn't an emotional letter. It was a contract. It outlined, in clear, unambiguous terms, what it would take for any of them to be a part of my life moving forward. It involved full financial repayment, a formal written apology, and a commitment to family therapy. I knew they would never agree to it. That wasn't the point. The point was to define the terms of my own life, for myself, for the first time ever. As the first hints of dawn started to break on December 26th, I was still at my desk. My phone had finally fallen silent. They had probably given up for the night, assuming I was asleep, licking my wounds. They had no idea I hadn't slept at all. They had no idea that while they were sleeping, I had been quietly dismantling the entire foundation of our family's dysfunctional dynamic. I had gathered my evidence. I had contacted my specialist. I had drafted my terms. I hadn't cried. I hadn't screamed. I had simply prepared. They thought they had won. They thought they had silenced the useless daughter. But the war wasn't over. It hadn't even started yet. And they were about to walk onto a battlefield they didn't even know existed, completely unarmed. After a night of silent, methodical preparation, I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm hadn't passed. It was just gathering force directly over my head, and I was standing in the eye of it, perfectly still. The frantic calls and texts had stopped around 2 a.m., replaced by an eerie silence. I knew what this silence meant. It was the silence of regrouping, the silence of strategy. They were plotting their next move, confident that my little outburst was over and that a bit of the silent treatment would bring me crawling back, full of apologies, just like always. They had no idea that this time I wasn't waiting for them to set the terms. I was setting a trap. And I knew exactly how to bait it. Around noon on the 26th, I sent a single, simple text to the family group chat, a chat I hadn't participated in for months. The text read, "We need to talk. I'll be at the house in an hour to pick up my old photo albums from the attic." It was the perfect lure. It sounded like a retreat, a sentimental gesture. It made me sound like the hurt child seeking comfort in old memories. It was exactly what they would expect. When I pulled up to the house, the scene was exactly as I had pictured. My father's car was in the driveway, alongside my brother's BMW and my sister's Lexus. They had assembled the whole tribunal. I walked in without knocking and found them all waiting for me in the living room, arranged like a panel of judges. My father sat in his large armchair, trying to look stern and authoritative. My mother was on the sofa, flanked by Kevin and Karen, a united front of disappointment and judgment. The air was thick with rehearsed gravity. This was an intervention. My intervention. They believed they were in complete control. My mother, Helen, was the first to speak. She didn't get up. She just gestured to the empty chair opposite them. the one they always put guests in. "Linda," she began, her voice dripping with condescending pity. "We are all very, very worried about you. Your behavior last night was shocking. It was erratic and deeply hurtful to everyone." My brother Kevin chimed in, not even looking up from his phone. "Yeah, Linda, it was pretty dramatic. You totally ruined Christmas." Karen just nodded in agreement, a smug little smirk on her face. They were following a script. I could see it. Phase 1. Establish a narrative of my instability. Phase 2. Induce guilt. Phase 3. Demand an apology and a return to the status quo. I just stood there, letting their words wash over me, my expression completely neutral. My calmness seemed to unnerve them. It wasn't part of their script. My mother pressed on, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "You made some very wild, very malicious accusations last night. You were clearly not yourself. We're willing to forgive you, for the sake of the family, but we need you to apologize, to all of us. And we need to know that this kind of theatrical outburst will never happen again. Forgive me." The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. They were offering to forgive me for exposing the truth. I didn't take the seat they offered. I remained standing, a deliberate act of defiance. I let the silence stretch out, watching their confident expressions begin to flicker with uncertainty. "I'm not here to apologize," I said finally. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room with the sharpness of glass. "I'm here for the truth." And then, I made my move. "Last night," I said, looking directly at my mother, "you called me useless. You said you didn't know what kind of man would propose to me." Her face tightened. "I was upset," she snapped. "You were being difficult." "Was I being difficult 2 years ago?" I asked, my voice still level. "When I started sending you $1,500 every single month to pay for the lease on your Mercedes after Dad's business took a hit?" I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Was I being difficult last spring?" I continued, turning my gaze to my father. "When I transferred $3,000 to your account to cover the out-of-pocket costs for your emergency surgery because you told me you didn't want Mom to worry?" My father's face went pale. He looked at my mother, a dawning horror in his eyes. He hadn't known. Of course he hadn't. I turned to my sister. "Was I being difficult, Karen, when I sent you $2,000 for your bar exam prep course after you'd spent your graduation money on a trip to Greece?" Karen's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of genuine shock. She looked at our mother, then back at me, speechless. Finally, I looked at my brother, the golden boy. "And Kevin," I said, "was I being difficult last year when I wired $4,000 to your student loan servicer to keep your account out of default so it wouldn't ruin your credit before you applied for your mortgage? Money, by the way, that I was saving for a down payment on my own place." Kevin actually put his phone down. His mouth was slightly open. He looked utterly bewildered. The confident, united front had completely crumbled. They were all looking at each other, then at me, their faces a mixture of confusion, shock, and dawning dread. They thought they had me cornered, but I had just revealed that the room they were in wasn't a courtroom. It was a cage, and I had been secretly holding the key the entire time. My mother was the first to recover, and she did it by going on the attack. "You! How dare you!" she spat, her voice shaking with rage. "You kept a list? You've been holding this over our heads, waiting for a chance to throw it in our faces. You are trying to blackmail your own family." That's when it happened. As I pulled my phone from my pocket to show them the proof, to show them the long, undeniable list of transactions, she lunged. It wasn't a slow movement. It was a sudden, violent burst of desperation. She surged forward from the couch, her hand outstretched like a claw, reaching for my phone. "Give me that!" she shrieked, her face twisted into a mask of pure fury. "You will not sit here and tell these lies." It was so shocking, so utterly unhinged, that for a second I was frozen. This was my mother, physically trying to snatch evidence from me, trying to silence me with force because her words had failed. It was the frantic act of a cornered animal. Before she could reach me, my father, finally jolted out of his stupor, roared, "Helen, stop it!" He shot out of his chair and grabbed her arm, pulling her back. The physicality of it, the raw, ugly desperation, it changed everything. This was no longer just a family argument. It had crossed a line into something much darker. The illusion of the perfect civilized family was shattered, replaced by the ugly reality of a woman willing to physically attack her own daughter to protect a lie. In that single, violent moment, she had proven my entire case for me more effectively than any bank statement ever could. 20-7s use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. The aftermath of my mother's desperate lunge was pure, unadulterated chaos. My father was holding her back, his face a mask of fury and disbelief, shouting her name over and over. "Helen, what is wrong with you?" My brother Kevin, for the first time in his life, looked genuinely terrified, as if the carefully constructed walls of his perfect world had just been vaporized. My sister Karen was just staring, her mouth agape, the gears in her sharp legal mind probably grinding to a halt, unable to process a situation that wasn't in a textbook. They were all frozen in this ugly tableau of shock and denial. I didn't wait for them to recover. I looked at the scene, the shattered illusion of a happy family, and I delivered my closing statement. "Congratulations," I said, my voice cutting through the pandemonium with icy calm. "You wanted to know what my value is. You're about to find out. Because effective immediately, the Bank of Linda is permanently closed." Then I turned around, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. The second I closed my car door, my phone, which I had put on silent, started vibrating so violently it felt like it was going to explode. It was a relentless, insane barrage. The screen lit up with my mother's name, then my father's, then Karen's, then Kevin's. A frantic, cyclical pattern of desperation. I didn't answer. I just started the car and drove, the constant buzzing a satisfying confirmation that the bomb I had just detonated had hit its target. The texts started pouring in, a waterfall of panic and disbelief. From Karen. "What the hell was that, Linda? You need to call me right now." From Kevin. "Mom is hysterical. You need to come back and fix this." Fix this. Even now, after everything, they still expected me to be the fixer. The most revealing text, though, was from my father. It simply said, "Is what you said about the surgery true?" The fact that he even had to ask, the fact that my mother had lied to him about something so fundamental, told me everything I needed to know. The rot in my family was far deeper than I had ever imagined. I drove straight to my fiancé David's apartment. The moment he opened the door and saw my face, he knew. He didn't ask questions. He just pulled me into a hug, and for the first time that day, I let myself tremble. I didn't cry. It was more like my body was just releasing 32 years of stored shock. He sat me down on the couch, put a glass of water in my hand, and took my phone. He looked at the screen, which was still lighting up like a Christmas tree, and his expression hardened. "I'll handle this," he said, and for the first time in my life, I felt what it was like to have someone else be the strong one, to have someone else stand between me and the storm. For the next 2 days, we lived in a bubble of blissful silence. David acted as my gatekeeper. He answered the calls, his voice calm and firm. "Linda's not available to talk right now. She needs some space." The messages he relayed to me were a predictable roller coaster of emotional manipulation, My mother, according to David, had swung wildly between tearful pleading and vicious accusations. She told him I was a vindictive, cruel daughter who was trying to destroy the family. She told him I was mentally unstable. My father, on the other hand, just sounded broken. He left a voicemail, which David played for me, his voice thick with a shame I had never heard before. Linda, honey, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. We need to talk. Please. But the real show began on the evening of the 28th. We were in the middle of dinner when there was a loud, aggressive banging on David's apartment door. Not a knock, a banging. It was the sound of someone who believed they had a right to be on the other side of that door. We both knew instantly who it was. David got up, his jaw set. "Let me," he said. He opened the door and there she was. My mother, Helen. Her hair was a mess, her coat was unbuttoned, and her face was a mask of pure, unfiltered fury. She tried to shoulder her way past David. "I need to see my daughter," she demanded. David didn't move. He's not a huge guy, but in that moment, he seemed like a brick wall. "Helen, this isn't a good time," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Linda has asked for space." My mother just sneered at him. "This doesn't concern you," she spat, then craned her neck to look past him, her eyes locking onto me. Her face wasn't sad. It wasn't apologetic. It was the face of a creditor who had come to collect a debt. "Linda," she said, her voice dropping the frantic act and turning into a cold, hard demand. "This has gone on long enough. You've made your little point. Your father is a wreck, and you've successfully ruined the holidays for everyone. Are you happy now?" I just stared at her, speechless. The sheer narcissistic audacity of her words was stunning. She wasn't here to check if I was okay. She wasn't here to mend fences. She was here to blame me for the consequences of her own actions. I stood up and walked to the door, standing beside David. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked, my voice devoid of any emotion. And then, she delivered the final, undeniable proof of what I truly was to her. She didn't talk about feelings. She didn't talk about family. She talked about logistics. "I don't have time for this childish drama," she said, her tone all business. "The automatic payment for the Mercedes is scheduled to come out of your account tomorrow. The $1,500 payment. I got an alert from the bank. It's going to bounce if you don't transfer the funds. Are you really going to be so petty, so vindictive, as to let them repossess my car over a little family disagreement?" A little family disagreement. The words echoed in the hallway. That's all it was to her. My entire life of feeling invisible, the public humiliation, her physically lunging at me. Just a little disagreement. In that moment, the last tiny ember of hope I held for her, the microscopic part of me that thought maybe, just maybe, deep down, she loved me unconditionally. It was extinguished. It was gone forever. It was never about me. It was never about love. It was about the money. I was a line item in her budget, an asset, a secret, reliable income stream. And now that the stream had run dry, she wasn't here to appeal to a daughter's love. She was here to berate a faulty ATM. The rage I felt was so cold and absolute that it felt like my blood had turned to ice. Before I could even speak, David stepped fully in front of me, shielding me from her. His voice was no longer polite. It was steel. "Helen," he said, "you need to leave, now." My mother opened her mouth to argue, to unleash another tirade, but she must have seen something in his eyes, a protective fury she had never seen in my father, and her mouth snapped shut. She shot me one last look, a look of pure, unadulterated venom, then turned and stormed away down the hall. David closed the door, and the silence that filled the apartment was the sound of a 32-year-old chain finally breaking. The war was over, and I had won. Not by fighting back with her weapons of guilt and manipulation, but by simply refusing to play her twisted game any longer. After David closed the door on my mother, the silence in the apartment wasn't empty. It was powerful. It was the sound of a final, unbreakable boundary being drawn not in sand, but in solid concrete. The frantic, manic energy of the past few days, the chaos she had tried to bring into my home, it all just evaporated. It couldn't penetrate these walls. In its place was a deep, anchoring calm. I knew the storm of consequences was still raging out there, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was safely in the harbor, watching the waves crash harmlessly against a seawall I had just built with my own two hands. That night, I slept for 10 solid hours, a deep, dreamless sleep I hadn't experienced since I was a child. When I woke up, the world felt fundamentally different. It was like a low-frequency hum of anxiety that had been the background noise of my entire existence had finally been switched off. The air in the room seemed easier to breathe. The world looked brighter, sharper. The constant, low-grade weight of their expectations, their drama, their disappointment. It was just gone. My phone, which had been blessedly silent all night, had one new voicemail. It was from my father. My hand trembled a little as I pressed play, and I leaned against David, who sat beside me, his presence a quiet source of unwavering strength. My father's voice filled the room, and it was a voice I had never heard before. It was stripped of all its usual bluster and authority. It was heavy, broken, and thick with a palpable shame. He didn't make a single excuse for my mother. He didn't try to smooth things over. He just apologized. For his silence over the years, for his willful blindness, for his ultimate failure, as he put it, to protect his daughter. He said he loved me and that the man he saw in the mirror that morning was a stranger to him. It was the most honest, most vulnerable thing I had ever heard him say, and as much as I was still angry, I knew that his pain was real. I knew I had to respond. I took a few hours to think, to really process what I needed to say. Then, that afternoon, I called him back. He answered on the first ring. "Dad," I said, my voice clear and steady, all the tremor gone. "I heard your message, and I want you to know, I love you too. But you need to understand. Things have to change. Permanently." I could hear him take a shaky breath on the other end of the line. "I know, honey," he said, his voice quiet. "Anything. Whatever you need." "Okay," I said, and then I laid out the new terms of engagement, the non-negotiable constitution of my new life. From this moment on, I will never again be a part of any financial secrets in this family. My money is my own. I am not a safety net. I am not an emergency fund. And I am not a silent partner in covering for Mom's spending, or Kevin's irresponsibility, or Karen's lifestyle. That is over. Completely and irrevocably. I let that sink in. And Mom, I took a breath. I need space. A lot of space. I need a long period of no contact with her. This isn't a punishment, Dad. It's for my own survival. I cannot heal in the same environment that made me sick. I need to be able to breathe without waiting for the next criticism, the next manipulation. He didn't argue. He didn't try to negotiate. He just said, his voice full of resignation, "I understand." It was a start. A fragile, painful, but necessary start. After I hung up with my dad, I sent one final message to the family group chat, a clear and concise statement to my siblings. "Kevin and Karen," it read, "for the sake of your own financial planning, please know that all financial support from me has ended permanently. Any future relationship we have will be built on a foundation of mutual respect, not obligation or expectation." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. My final act of self-preservation that day was the most decisive. I opened my phone's contacts and scrolled to my mother's name. I looked at it for a long moment, a name that had once represented both comfort and terror. Then, my thumb moved with a certainty that felt foreign and wonderful. I pressed the block button. A confirmation popped up on the screen, asking, "Are you sure you want to block this caller?" I tapped the final block without a single shred of hesitation. The sense of relief was immediate and overwhelming, a physical sensation like a 50-pound backpack I didn't even realize I had been carrying had just been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to their drama, I was choosing myself. I was choosing peace. This was a huge, defining moment. If you support this powerful decision to finally put herself first, drop a flexed bicep emoji in the comments right now to send some strength her way on this new journey. With the deafening noise from my biological family finally silenced, I began to truly hear the voices that had been there all along, the ones that truly mattered. I started to see the real family, the chosen family, that had been my actual support system for years. David, of course, was my rock. He was the architect of my safe harbor. He never once told me what to do, never said, "I told you so." He just listened. He made me coffee in the morning. He held me when I needed to be held and gave me space when I needed to think. He constantly reminded me that my feelings were valid, that my anger was justified, and that my decision was an act of strength, not cruelty. He was the living, breathing proof of what a healthy, supportive partnership was supposed to feel like. That night, my best friend, Mike, a guy I'd known since we were broke college kids, showed up at the door unannounced. He wasn't holding flowers or a sympathy card. He was a man on a mission. He was holding a 30-pack of cheap beer and 2 large pizzas, 1 pepperoni and 1 with everything. He walked in, put the stuff on the counter, and gave me a huge, bone-crushing hug. He didn't ask for the gory details or force me to relive the trauma. He just looked at me with his honest, knowing eyes, cracked open a beer, and said, "It's about damn time you dropped them, Linda." And then we spent the next 3 hours eating pizza directly from the box, drinking beer, and talking about stupid movies and old college stories. We talked about anything and everything except my family. It was the most normal, most grounding, most healing thing I could have possibly done. His unconditional, no bullshit friendship was a powerful antidote to a lifetime of conditional love. The next day, I had to face the reality of my professional life. I was still on my personal days, but I felt a pang of guilt, a ghost of my old people-pleasing self. I sent a brief email to my boss, Sarah, apologizing for the sudden absence and assuring her I would be back soon. Her response came back within minutes. It wasn't an interrogation. It wasn't a demand for a doctor's note. It was simple, direct, and filled with a level of professional respect I had never once received from my own parents. She wrote, "Linda, do not apologize. Take all the time you need. Your well-being comes first. Your team is solid, and we have everything covered. Just let us know when you're ready. No questions asked." No questions asked. That simple phrase hit me with the force of a tidal wave. It was a gesture of trust. It was a statement that my value as a person and an employee wasn't contingent on my constant, uninterrupted productivity. It was a level of grace and understanding that my own mother was incapable of. In the quiet of those next few days, surrounded by the steadfast love of my fiancé, the easy camaraderie of my best friend, and the professional respect of my boss, a profound truth settled over me. Family isn't just about blood. It's not about who you're born to. It's about who shows up. It's about who respects your boundaries. It's about who celebrates your victories without a hint of jealousy, and who sits with you in your pain without trying to make it about themselves. The chaos of that Christmas hadn't broken me. It had simply been a controlled demolition. It had cleared away the toxic, rotten structures of my old life and allowed me to finally see the strong, healthy foundation that had been there all along, waiting for me to build upon it. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, I wasn't walking it alone. I was surrounded by my real team. Fast forward 1 year. If you could see me now, you might not recognize me. And I mean that in the best possible way. The reflection in the mirror is of a woman who stands up straight, a woman whose smile reaches her eyes. The perpetual tension that used to live as a permanent resident in my shoulders has been evicted. The faint, worried line that was permanently etched between my eyebrows from a lifetime of trying to anticipate the next emotional blow, it's gone. David and I got married 6 months ago. We didn't have a big, flashy ceremony designed to impress my parents' friends or to serve as a backdrop for their family portrait. We had something better. We had a beautiful, intimate gathering in the mountains, under a canopy of pine trees, surrounded only by our chosen family, the people who truly see us, the ones who celebrate our love without reservation. And last month, we closed on our first house. It's not a mansion, but it's ours. A cozy place with a small backyard where we plan to get a dog, a goofy golden retriever who will be ridiculously spoiled. And yes, the down payment for that house came directly from my Freedom Fund, a fund that is now healthier and growing faster than ever before. At work, something incredible happened once the smoke cleared. Without the constant mental and emotional drain of being my family's on-call crisis manager and secret financier, it was like a fog had lifted from my brain. My focus, my energy, my creativity, they all skyrocketed. I was no longer just surviving my work week. I was attacking it with a newfound passion. I took on bigger projects, led my team to win 2 major new accounts, and developed a campaign that got national recognition. Last quarter, my boss, Sarah, called me into her office. I walked in expecting the usual review, but instead, she offered me a promotion. Not the senior coordinator, to marketing director. The girl they called useless is now running the entire department. Life isn't just good. It's peaceful. It's joyful. It's a life I have built, not one I am just enduring. It is completely and utterly mine. As for my biological family, well, reality is a patient creditor, and their bill finally came due. Without my secret financial infusions, the fragile, glittering house of cards they had constructed came tumbling down with a brutal finality. My parents were forced to sell the big family house, the beautiful stage for so many of my private humiliations, and move into a much smaller condo across town. The shiny Mercedes, the one my mother paraded around town while calling me a failure, was repossessed just as she had feared. I heard from my Aunt Susan that they are now in intensive financial counseling, forced for the first time in their marriage to actually look at their finances, to confront the decades of irresponsible spending they had masked with my silent contributions. The fallout didn't spare my siblings either. Kevin, the golden boy surgeon, had to face the music. He was forced to consolidate his loans and start living on an actual resident's salary, which was a brutal shock to his system. He's slowly, painfully paying back what he owes, both to the banks and to me. Karen, the legal eagle, had her wings clipped. Without the parental subsidy to maintain her high-cost lifestyle in a high-powered law firm, she had to take a less glamorous, but more stable, government job. The golden cage is gone, and for the first time in their coddled lives, they are being forced to stand on their own 2 feet. The ground, I imagine, feels very hard. About 3 months ago, after almost a year of complete silence, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. It was my mother. Her voice was different. All the sharp, arrogant edges had been worn away, the entitlement, the condescension. It was all gone. In its place was a tired, quiet, and profoundly sad humility. She didn't make excuses. She didn't try to manipulate me. She just apologized. A real one this time. Not a "sorry you feel that way" non-apology, but a gut-wrenching admission of her cruelty, her jealousy, her narcissism, and her profound failure as a mother. She cried. I had never heard her cry like that before. It wasn't a performance. It was the sound of a woman who had finally been forced to look at her own reflection and was horrified by what she saw. She said she understood if I never wanted to speak to her again, but she just needed to say it. I listened, and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I felt a kind of distant pity. I accepted her apology, but I also made the new terms of our reality crystal clear. I told her, "Mom, I forgive you. But you need to understand that forgiveness and reconciliation are two very different things. Forgiveness is something I'm giving to myself so I can let go of the anger and the pain. It's me putting down the heavy weight I've been carrying. But reconciliation, that requires trust. And trust has been shattered. It has to be rebuilt, brick by painful, painstaking brick, over a very long time. Our relationship will never be what it was. If it's going to be anything at all, it will be something entirely new. Something built on a foundation of honesty and respect, not obligation and fear. It's a work in progress, and maybe it always will be. But it's an honest work in progress, and that's more than we ever had before. Looking back on that explosive Christmas, I've come to understand a fundamental lesson. It wasn't really about money, or even about revenge. It was about the language we use and the definitions we accept. They called me useless, but I realized that in their twisted transactional vocabulary, useful just meant usable. Someone they could drain, emotionally and financially, to prop up their own fragile egos and glittering facade. My real victory wasn't in watching their world crumble. It was finally a definitive understanding that my worth was never up for their negotiation. It was inherent. It was absolute. And it didn't require their validation or their permission to exist. Financial independence is freedom. It truly is. It's the power to say no, the power to walk away from a bad deal, whether it's in a boardroom or at a family dinner table. But emotional independence, that's true power. It's the unshakable, internal knowledge that you are enough, just as you are. It's the peace that comes from no longer needing the approval of people who are incapable of giving it. This journey has been the most difficult and painful of my life, but it led me here. To a life that is authentically mine, a life filled with a love that is real and unconditional, and a peace that is deep and earned. I had to burn my old life to the ground to build this new one from the ashes, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family members who took you for granted or refused to see your worth? How did you navigate those painful but necessary conversations? Share your story in the comments below, because your experience, your strength, could be the lifeline someone else needs to read today. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding your voice and reclaiming your power. Remember, you teach people how to treat you. And sometimes, the most powerful and loving lesson you can teach, both to them and to yourself, is that you are no longer accepting anything less than you deserve.